Okay, guys, so we are on part three now, the last part of this very, very interesting, um, really a year like no other in no other nation. September to December. So we're going to ask this question: why was it that the Bolsheviks emerged triumphant in October 1917, and why did we not have a socialist government? Um, it's a difficult question to answer. Well, maybe it's not a difficult question to answer, but choosing the key factor, is definitely a difficult thing, and historians have troubled and struggled over that for many a year. Um, the first section of this part then is obviously going to be the setting up of the insurrection, so deciding on it. How did they decide on it? You will know obviously bits of this already from your reading, but just so we can get this really clear in our heads. So obviously we left the last part on the Kornilov affair, which obviously destroyed the prestige of the provisional government, as we saw, and it also rehabilitated the Bolsheviks and increased this fear of a counter-revolution, which is which is a key point to bear in mind. And so off the back of that, the Bolsheviks they're really in the ascendancy now. And on the 9th of September, so less than a couple of weeks after the Kornilov affair, they managed to get a majority in the Petrograd Soviet. So they've got a majority in the most important Soviet in Russia. And not only that, but Trotsky has become the chairman. So why is this so important? Well, obviously, we're now in a situation where this Soviet is going to be pushed further to the left. It's going to be open to Bolshevik policy. We know that workers are more radicalized anyway now because of the stresses on the economy, and the disintegration of the army. And as we can see here at the bottom of this table here, really quite a remarkable turnaround for the Bolsheviks to go from 10,000 estimated membership in February, when all the leaders were abroad and they were really not seen as anything a threat to anybody. And by October 1917, 250,000 membership. So absolutely ballooned. And not only that, but they also take majorities, as you can see here, in the other major Soviets. So the Soviet in Moscow, the Saratov Soviet, and the Riga Soviet in Latvia. How they managed to do this? Well, as you can see here in this quite wonderful painting, I think, of Lenin giving a speech. After April, there had been intense activities in the Soviets, getting the party slogans out, peace, land and bread, ending the war, the simplicity of the April theses in that regard really hitting home. So this is an image of the Putilov factory, which was, has played a really important role in this year. They were the ones that striked for 50% pay in February, and half of them were fired. They turn up time and time again. And as we can see here, one factory worker said of Lenin speaking in a situation like this, he said, "His words stirred us, fired us. Fear vanished. Fatigue passed away." And it seemed as if this was not only the voice of Lenin, but of all the 40,000 workers, sitting, standing, clinging to the roof, a voice giving utterance to their innermost thoughts. And I think that's really important to bear in mind, that they really did connect with the workers, and the workers really did feel that they were the party that were going to deliver to them what they wanted. So bear this in mind when we come to later questions about whether this was a coup or whether this was a people's revolution. It's not as simple as it seems, this debate. Okay. So, the leaders are Lenin and Zinoviev are in Finland in a hut. Here is the hut, living in very wet conditions. And whilst they're in this hut, Lenin writes to the Bolshevik Central Committee, and these become known as the July Theses, basically. He's telling them, now's the time. We need to take power now. And they don't listen to him, which historians agree is the right move. Trotsky, Kamenev, the ones in charge now, they don't listen to him, and it's believed if they would have moved at that point, they may have been completely finished. They'd only just begun to enjoy majority in the Soviets, as we can see here. And also Lenin didn't really give any actual instructions. He was kind of quite pie in the sky about this. And how were they supposed to turn around to the party and explain a completely different stance to what they had been saying since April? So, whilst Lenin's away and he returns, he gets really frustrated. He comes back with Zinoviev, disguised again. Actually has to shovel coal into a train to get himself, because he's disguised. He's on the, people are looking for him, of course. Manages to make his way back into Petrograd through the party contacts. But whilst he's coming back, there is what is known as the Civil War election, which you've seen, heard of before as well. We can kind of see it represented in this image here. Obviously, the Civil War is just around the corner in 1918 due to the takeover. And the SRs and the Mensheviks, they at a democratic conference, they agreed to renew their coalition, and this absolutely destroys their share of the vote in the City Duma elections in St. Petersburg. We've got the figures here for the vote in Moscow. SRs down from 58% to 14% from July to October. Mensheviks are down. Bolsheviks go from 11% to 51%, and the cadets up from 17% to 26%. So again, Feiges points out that at this point we can start to see that there is no centre ground now. There's no one is interested in a moderate party. They are flocking to the right and the left, and we are starting to see an opposition there and a real tension. So, as we know, having made his way back, Lenin manages to reach a secret meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee on the 10th of October. Not everybody could be there. We've got an image of it here, I believe. We can see Sverdlov here, we can see Stalin, Dzerzhinsky I recognise, Kollontai here, and obviously Lenin, importantly, without his beard. Kamenev in the background as well. And this is the meeting in which the Central Committee decides that they are going to strike. They are going to take power. It's not a simple process. Lenin's ironically dressed as a pastor, apparently, so maybe this isn't an actual image of that exact time here, but I wanted to get it as close as I could. He's dressed as a Lutheran pastor. Apparently he's wearing a wig, and as he's making his case, the wig keeps slipping off his head. I don't know why I put that in, but I think these little moments are important in history. Again, quite comical to think of this massive moment in the history of Russia, and the mastermind is trying to keep this wig on his head. But as I've said here, it's anything but a joke what he asks them to back. Lenin feels that all of the Soviets now are behind him. They've got enough popular support to go for this. Otherwise, they would have a zero legitimacy. Really important to keep in mind. And as it says here, well, the peasants vote for the SRs, but the peasants are already taking the land, so why are they going to vote for anybody if they're already getting what they want? And the Bolsheviks are going to give them what they're already getting, which is land. There's a lengthy debate. 10 out of the 12 vote for it. They're aware of what it means. Trotsky goes straight down the middle. Tries to move an amendment to actually end it, but it does get put through. And here are the notes from that meeting, which I find quite brilliant. Again, such an amazing document. I cannot read Russian, so we can't know what it says, but who are the two that vote against then? Well, Kamenev and Zinoviev, they don't agree with him. Kamenev, as we've seen, always been more, he's heavily to the left, because he's a Bolshevik, but he's in the right of the party. And they disagree with him on 2 points. The first, they believe that socialist democracy is around the corner, so there's no real need to force this issue. The provisional government would just fall by itself. And they didn't believe, as Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and various other Bolshevik Marxists did, that Europe was ripe for socialist revolution. That the moment that Russia became a socialist nation, that the rest of Europe would fall almost like dominoes, and all the various proletariat would rise up. They didn't believe that was the case, didn't engage in that type of sort of utopian thinking, and they make their feelings known. Importantly, they write a joint letter to the party. They also write a letter to the Soviet, and therefore, another mistake, I haven't really written it here, I forgot to put it in, but the other parties know that this is going to happen. They don't act, though. They take their time to prepare, which again is another what if moment. If they'd have realised what was going to happen, they could have tried to at least act, but they didn't. They waited. Importantly as well, Kamenev and Zinoviev are later taken out by Stalin precisely for this moment. So just keep that in mind for later in the course. Alright, so this period I've put the 10th to the 23rd because this is kind of all of the preparations happening. We're coming to the end of this section here. So what happens now then? Well, the Military Revolutionary Committee is formed. What is the Military Revolutionary Committee? Okay, well, it's inspired largely by the response to the Kornilov affair. Kerensky makes the amount of people in power in the story of 1917 and Russia, Tsarist Russia, and in the provisional government that make errors that hand the initiative to the other side is just unbelievable, isn't it? But Kerensky makes another massive error here. He tries to take these revolutionary garrisons out to the front. Obviously, it didn't work in June. This provokes a mutiny, and off the back of this mutiny, Trotsky is the person who tables the motion, who creates essentially the Military Revolutionary Committee. You can see him here. And his rationale for this committee is to defend Petrograd, as you can see here, from being attacked by the military itself and even by the Kornilovites. So the Military Revolutionary Committee is kind of like a military government, really. Or that's how it sort of functions. Obviously, we're in this strange zone where power is really not actually constituted anywhere, is it? So of course, because the Soviet is now a Bolshevik majority, and because we've had this this mutiny, this resolution is passed, and what this now means then is that the Bolsheviks essentially have their own army, which are the garrisons in Petrograd, and so the Soviet sends commissars, its own representatives, to the army units in the city, and it says to the generals there, we're the ones that have command now over these garrisons. So again, really important, the role of the army, and who controls or who gives the orders to the soldiers, in terms of outlining who has what power. Very, very interesting. So again, as we'll see, this is the force which is going to go out and literally take the key, all of the key areas, and as we say, the strategic elements of Petrograd. Trotsky himself says in the Lessons of October, so from the moment when we, as the Petrograd Soviet, invalidated Kerensky's order transferring 2/3 of the garrison to the front, we had already actually entered a state of armed insurrection. The outcome of the insurrection of October the 25th was at least 3/4 settled, if not more, the moment that we opposed the transfer of the Petrograd garrison and created the MRC. So again, I'm going to be asking you to choose the sort of key moment or the turning point. Are you going to go with Trotsky here? It's quite a compelling case. I'll leave it to you. Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're going to leave it at this. So this is the Smolny Institute. This is where all the parties met to talk. They're all in the same building. And this is where the second Congress, as we can see, I've got the third Congress actually here, was held. At this point, Lenin has been left out of the arrangement actually of the takeover, because they saw him as too hot-headed and they didn't want his influence really, almost too pushy. So again, bear that in mind when we're thinking about why, what was the most important factor. It wasn't always all Lenin. I'm going to leave it there, and we'll come back for section B, taking power.